Something happened at this year's World Cup that had never happened before in the history of international football governance. And it did not happen on the pitch. On July 8th, a group of more than 70 elected members of the European Parliament put their names on a formal letter demanding that FIFA's Ethics Committee open a full investigation into the man running the tournament, FIFA President Gianni Infantino. This was not a viral post or an angry tweet thread. It was an institutional move signed by dozens of sitting lawmakers from one of the most powerful political bodies on the planet, and it was aimed squarely at the question of whether the president of world football had broken the one rule that is supposed to sit above everything else in his job description: political neutrality. Buried inside FIFA's own statutes is a clause that has existed for decades. It says the organization and its leadership must remain neutral. No political figure from any country is supposed to be able to reach into football's decision-making process and change an outcome. That is not a suggestion or a guideline written for public relations purposes. It is a binding rule. And according to the European lawmakers now demanding an investigation, that rule has been broken. Not quietly, not behind closed doors, but out in the open in the middle of an active World Cup, with the President of the United States on one end of the phone line. So how did football's governing body end up here, less than 2 weeks from the final at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey? The answer stretches back months before a single ball was kicked. A relationship that raised eyebrows early. Long before the opening match in Mexico City, Gianni Infantino's closeness with President Trump had already become a subject of concern inside FIFA's own walls. Back in early December of last year, during the official World Cup draw held in Washington, Infantino unveiled something that had never existed in FIFA's history: a brand new prize called the FIFA Peace Prize. He gave the very first one on the spot to President Trump. Reports later suggested that fewer than 10 FIFA staff members had even been consulted before that decision was made. It was an award invented for the occasion, handed to the leader of the country hosting the majority of the tournament by the man in charge of running it. People inside FIFA's own offices were reportedly embarrassed watching it unfold live. Weeks later, video surfaced of Infantino at Trump's presidential inauguration, and he posted about it himself, language that read to many observers as a personal endorsement rather than the neutral posture his job requires. The human rights organization Fair Square filed a formal complaint over the Peace Prize back in December, arguing that Infantino had committed several distinct breaches of FIFA's neutrality rules just through that single gesture. By late June, 50 members of the European Parliament representing 13 different countries had signed onto a letter backing that complaint, telling FIFA's Ethics Committee directly that handing a serving head of state an invented award was, in their words, a blatant violation of the obligation to stay neutral. Then came the hat. In February, months before kickoff, photographs circulated of Infantino wearing a red cap carrying a slogan that closely echoed the president's own political branding. FIFA's rules on this point leave no room for interpretation. Campaign-adjacent imagery involving any political movement in any country crosses the line for a sitting FIFA president. The photo spread within hours. Criticism followed almost as fast. FIFA's response, as it so often would be in the months ahead, was silence. The red card that changed everything. All of that was simply the backdrop. The moment that actually detonated this controversy came during the knockout rounds, when American striker Folarin Balogun was sent off with a straight red card in the United States' last 32 match against Bosnia and Herzegovina. Video review confirmed the referee's decision on the pitch. Under the rules that have governed every World Cup in history, a confirmed straight red card in the knockout stage carries an automatic one-match ban. Balogun was set to miss the round of 16 against Belgium, and the United States would go into that match without their top scorer. That is when the President of the United States picked up the phone and called Infantino directly. Trump later said publicly that he told Infantino the red card was, in his words, horrible, and that he believed it would leave a permanent stain on the tournament. He insisted he never ordered FIFA to do anything, that he could not tell Infantino what to do. But he openly confirmed making the call and raising the case, while the disciplinary matter was still active. 2 days later, FIFA's disciplinary committee suspended the one-match ban, placing Balogun on what amounted to a year-long probation instead. For the first time in World Cup history, a confirmed straight red card in a knockout match did not result in the automatic suspension being served. Balogun played the full 90 minutes against Belgium. The United States lost 4-1. The reversal changed nothing about the result, but it changed everything about how seriously anyone could trust the disciplinary process going forward. Belgium's Football Federation called the decision astonishing and immediately began exploring an appeal, giving FIFA a strict deadline to hand over supporting documents. UEFA, European football's governing body, described the reversal as unprecedented, incomprehensible, and unjustifiable. Belgium's own social media accounts posted a simple two-word message after their victory: overturn this. Former FIFA president Sepp Blatter, who ran the organization for years before Infantino, weighed in publicly as well, writing that red cards are not overturned by political phone calls. They are overturned by rules, evidence, and independent bodies. Germany's Oliver Kahn asked sarcastically whether FIFA planned to go back and replay the 2002 World Cup final, since a yellow card shown to Michael Ballack in the semifinal had never been rescinded either. England manager Thomas Tuchel, fresh off his own team's win, said he simply wanted consistency and could not understand who had made the call to reverse the ban or on what grounds. Lawmakers draw a direct line. That is when the 50 MEPs from June became more than 70 by July 8th. A joint statement led by members including Barry Andrews, Lara Walters, and Niels Fogelsang described the mid-tournament rule change as a scandal and a distortion of justice, and said plainly that FIFA had, once again, bowed to pressure from the Trump administration. They urged the football associations of all 27 European Union member states to formally request that FIFA's ethics committee investigate whether political pressure shaped the decision and to audit Infantino's inner circle for any other potential breaches of neutrality rules. Norway's Football Federation joined the call as well, adding its own voice to a growing list of national bodies uncomfortable with what they were watching unfold. Fair Square, the same rights group behind the original Peace Prize complaint, announced it would also file a formal complaint with the International Olympic Committee over what it called Infantino's ongoing violations of political neutrality standards, a signal that this dispute is no longer confined to football's own institutions. Timing that made things worse. The European Parliament's letter did not land in a vacuum. It arrived one day after Argentina beat Egypt 3-2 in a wild round of 16 match in Atlanta, a game that produced its own separate storm. Egypt had been leading and appeared to have doubled their advantage when forward Mustafa Zico finished off a brilliant team move, only for the video assistant referee to step in and rule the goal out for a foul in the buildup, a foul that happened roughly 100 yards from where the goal itself was scored. Former Premier League referee Mark Clattenburg said publicly that the intervention should never have happened. A former World Cup final video official from Mexico argued the same, saying the review fell outside the type of case VAR is even permitted to examine under the sport's own rulebook. Analysts including Jamie Carragher, Alan Shearer, Ian Wright, and Rob Green all criticized the inconsistency of how video review was applied throughout the match, particularly compared to a penalty claim for Argentina's decisive third goal that went unreviewed. Egypt's coaching staff filed a formal complaint of their own, and reports suggested one of the team's staff members sent the referee a pointed message afterward, telling him the world was watching. Legally, the Balogun reversal and the Egypt VAR decision are two completely separate incidents, run through entirely different mechanisms inside FIFA's structure. But the public did not experience them as separate. Both benefited a nation whose fortunes mattered enormously to FIFA's commercial and political interests in this tournament. Both kept a marquee team alive deep into the knockout stage, and both arrived within roughly a week of each other, close enough that they now sit side by side on FIFA's desk as evidence of what critics call a pattern rather than a coincidence. FIFA's answer has not changed. Through all of it, FIFA's institutional posture has stayed remarkably consistent. Asked directly by a BBC reporter whether he had lost control of the tournament, Infantino told the journalist to calm down and relax. The same phrase he has used when fans raised concerns about ticket pricing, and the same reassurance he gave when asked about ongoing Attorney General inquiries into FIFA's ticketing practices in the United States. Infantino has also stated that he told Trump himself that the Balogun matter was handled entirely by FIFA's independent judicial bodies, a claim made to the very person who had just called him about that same case before it was overturned. Independent judicial bodies is the phrase FIFA keeps returning to, and it is also the exact phrase the European lawmakers say means nothing until FIFA proves it. Their response has been simple. If the process really is independent, open it up, publish the communications, show that the phone call had zero influence on the outcome. So far, neither Infantino nor FIFA has agreed to do any of that. The Peace Prize. One more look. It is worth stepping back to look more closely at exactly what the FIFA Peace Prize actually was, because the details matter here. FIFA has never in its entire history handed out an award with that name before last December. There was no established selection process, no shortlist of past humanitarian figures, no precedent inside the organization for how such a prize should even be judged. It appeared fully formed at the moment of the World Cup draw ceremony in Washington, and it went to the sitting president of the host nation on its very first outing. Fair Square's complaint, filed with FIFA's Ethics Committee back in December and still unresolved as of this month, laid out 4 separate alleged breaches tied to that single event. The group argued that Infantino does not have the authority under FIFA's own governing documents to unilaterally invent new institutional policy, let alone hand out an award of that significance without sign-off from the FIFA Council or its bureau. FIFA has not published any account of how or when that decision was actually approved internally, and it has not responded publicly to Fair Square's specific claims about the approval process. Norway joins the Chorus Norway's Football Federation, one of the more vocal member associations inside UEFA on governance issues in recent years, added its name to the list of bodies calling for a formal probe into Infantino's relationship with the Trump administration. That matters because most public criticism of FIFA leadership over the years has come from journalists, rights groups, and rival federations with an obvious competitive interest in the outcome. A national governing body stepping forward with its own institutional voice, separate from any specific match result, signals that this concern has moved beyond a few aggrieved fans in Belgium or Egypt and into the realm of formal football governance itself. What an actual investigation would require, if FIFA's Ethics Committee were to open the kind of inquiry the European lawmakers are demanding, it would not be a simple formality. Investigators would likely need access to internal FIFA communications from around the time of the Balogun decision, including any records of the phone call between Trump and Infantino, notes from the disciplinary committee's deliberations, and documentation showing who exactly proposed suspending the automatic one-match ban and on what grounds. They would also need to examine the approval chain behind the Peace Prize itself and potentially revisit the February photograph controversy to determine whether it constituted a standalone breach or part of a broader pattern. None of that has happened yet, and there is no public timeline for when or if it will. FIFA's Ethics Committee operates independently of the organization's president on paper, but its members are appointed through processes that ultimately trace back to the same governance structure Infantino sits atop, which is precisely the structural weakness critics like Fair Square have pointed to for years. Reaction from inside the game. Beyond the politicians and the rights groups, some of the most pointed criticism has come from people who spent their careers inside professional football. Peter Schmeichel, the Danish goalkeeping legend, questioned publicly why a decision of this magnitude could be reversed with so little transparency about the reasoning behind it. Jose Mourinho and Jurgen Klopp, both speaking in separate media appearances during the tournament, raised similar concerns about consistency, with Klopp noting that referees and disciplinary panels only function properly if players and coaches can trust that every case is judged by the same standard regardless of which federation or which nation is involved. Alan Shearer and Ian Wright, working as television analysts throughout the tournament, have returned to the topic repeatedly on air, arguing that the accumulation of controversial calls, first the Balogun reversal, then the disallowed Egyptian goal, then the inconsistent application of video review in the penalty situation that followed it, has created a credibility problem for the tournament that no amount of reassurance from FIFA's press office can fix. Their argument is not that any single decision was necessarily made in bad faith, but that the pattern itself, regardless of intent, has damaged trust in the process. The Egyptian Federation's position: Egypt's Football Federation has not limited itself to social media complaints. It filed a formal grievance with FIFA over the disallowed Zico goal, requesting a full review of the video assistant referee's decision-making process during the match against Argentina. The Federation's letter reportedly argues that the review exceeded the scope permitted under the International Football Association Board's own laws of the game, since the alleged foul in question occurred well outside the build-up phase that video review is supposed to cover. That complaint now sits alongside the European Parliament's letter on FIFA's desk. Two separate grievances arriving within days of each other, both alleging that the tournament's disciplinary and review processes bent in a direction that happened to favor teams whose continued presence mattered most to FIFA's commercial and diplomatic interests in the United States. FIFA has not issued a substantive public response to either complaint beyond its general insistence that its judicial and disciplinary bodies operate independently of political influence. A tournament still playing out. None of this controversy has slowed the tournament itself. The quarterfinal round is underway across stadiums in the United States, Mexico, and Canada, with the final set for MetLife Stadium in New Jersey on July 19th. Attendance and television numbers have reportedly exceeded FIFA's own projections for the expanded 48-team format, and the organization has continued to promote the tournament as the largest and most commercially successful World Cup in its history. That commercial success is itself part of the backdrop lawmakers point to when raising concerns about political neutrality. A World Cup hosted primarily in the United States, generating record revenue, arrives at the same moment its president has cultivated an unusually close public relationship with the country's head of state, and critics argue that proximity creates exactly the kind of pressure FIFA's own neutrality rules were written to prevent. FIFA, for its part, has continued to describe the tournament's success as proof that its leadership is doing its job well, arguing that record engagement numbers speak for themselves regardless of the parallel controversy over governance. What happens next? There is no formal deadline attached to the European Parliament's request, and FIFA's Ethics Committee is under no binding obligation to open an investigation simply because lawmakers from outside the organization have asked for one. The committee could quietly review the complaint and decline to take further action, a path FIFA has taken in comparable disputes in the past, when the organization judged that public pressure would fade once a tournament ended. It could also, in theory, open a preliminary inquiry without making its findings public, which critics say would satisfy the letter of the demand without providing any of the transparency lawmakers are actually asking for. The more likely outcome, according to several of the sports governance analysts who have followed this story closely, is that FIFA continues its current approach, acknowledging the letter exists, repeating that its disciplinary bodies are independent, and declining to open its internal communications to outside scrutiny while the tournament continues. Whether that posture holds once the trophy is lifted in New Jersey, once media attention shifts away from daily match coverage and back toward institutional accountability, remains the open question hanging over the rest of this World Cup and over Gianni Infantino's presidency of FIFA more broadly. For more